There is a quiet truth about human connection that many fail to see. People do not love the way you expect, they love the way they are built. And among us are those who carry a silent paradox within them. They desire closeness, yet fear being consumed by it. They long for love, yet retreat when it arrives too strongly. These are the ones often misunderstood, labeled as distant, cold, or incapable. But look deeper, and you will see something else entirely. They are not empty, they are guarded. Not heartless, but careful. Not unwilling, but afraid of losing themselves in the process of loving another. And here is the wisdom most people miss. They do not form lifelong bonds with those who chase them, pressure them, or try to fix them. That energy feels like a storm to their inner world. It activates their deepest fear, the fear of being overwhelmed, controlled, or losing autonomy. Instead, they are drawn powerfully, almost magnetically, to a different kind of presence. A person who is whole W in themselves. A person who does not beg for attention, but radiates self-respect. A person who can stand close without clinging. A person who offers warmth without demanding possession. This kind of partner becomes a sanctuary, because true bonding for them is not built through intensity, it is built through safety, through consistency, through the quiet assurance that love does not mean losing freedom. Understand this. When you give space to someone who fears closeness, you are not pushing them away, you are creating the very conditions in which they can come closer. But this is where divine principle enters. Love is not about control. It is not about bending another person into your expectations. It is about alignment, meeting someone at the level of truth, not illusion. If you try to hold tightly, you create resistance. If you demand certainty, you awaken fear. But if you embody calm strength, if you become grounded, secure, and self-sufficient, you become the one they can trust. Ninth, trust for them is everything. Because once they feel safe, truly safe, they do not love halfway. They commit deeply, quietly, permanently. Not with loud declarations, but with steady presence. Not with urgency, but with endurance. So the real question is not, how do I make them stay? The real question is, can I become the kind of person who doesn't need to chase? Because the truth is powerful. The right connection is not forced, it is allowed. It is invited. It is built on the foundation of two whole individuals choosing each other freely. And when that happens, even the most guarded heart learns to open, not because it was pushed, but because it finally felt safe enough to stay. What many people misinterpret as a lack of love is often a deeply rooted response to emotional overwhelm. An avoidant person does not wake up one day and decide to reject closeness. Rather, they develop a heightened sensitivity to anything that feels like it might take away their inner sense of control. To understand them, you have to look beyond behavior and into the emotional wiring that drives it. When connection begins to deepen, when conversations become more vulnerable, when expectations start forming, when emotional dependency enters the space, they don't experience it as simple intimacy. They experience it as pressure, even if no pressure is intended. This is because, at a subconscious level, closeness can feel like a threat to their independence. It's not that they don't value relationships, it's that they associate emotional intensity with the risk of losing themselves. In their internal world, love and engulfment can feel dangerously close to each other. So when things start getting serious, their instinct is not to lean in, it's to create distance. Not because they don't care, but because they are trying to regulate an internal discomfort that feels overwhelming to them. Imagine standing in a room where the temperature suddenly rises beyond your comfort level. Even if the room is beautiful, even if you want to stay, your body will urge you to step out for relief. That's how emotional closeness can feel for an avoidant individual when it surpasses their tolerance threshold. They need space not as a rejection, but as a way to regain balance. Without that space, they feel trapped. And when a person feels trapped, their natural reaction is to escape. This is where many relationships begin to fracture. The other person, often unaware of this internal dynamic, interprets the withdrawal as disinterest or lack of love. In response, they may try to close the gap by seeking reassurance, asking for more time, more communication, more emotional presence. But to the avoidant partner, this pursuit intensifies the very feeling they are trying to escape. What is meant as an attempt to connect is received as an increase in pressure. So a cycle begins: one person moves closer, the other pulls away. The more one seeks closeness, the more the other defends their space and bot. Each individuals end up feeling misunderstood. The deeper truth is this: avoidant individuals are not rejecting love itself, they are rejecting the feeling of losing control within love. When they sense that they can remain themselves independent, self-directed, and emotionally safe, they are far more open to connection. But when closeness feels like it comes with expectations that might consume their autonomy, their defenses rise automatically. Understanding this shifts everything. Instead of seeing their behavior as cold or indifferent, it becomes clear that it is a protective mechanism, one that was likely shaped long before the current relationship. And when you recognize that their need for space is not a sign of absence of feeling, but a way of managing intensity, you begin to approach them with more clarity, patience, and emotional intelligence. An avoidant person does not measure connection by how intense it feels in the moment, but by how safe it feels over time. This distinction is subtle, yet it changes everything. Where some people interpret closeness through constant communication, emotional expression, and shared dependency, the avoidant individual is quietly observing something deeper. Can I be in this connection without losing my sense of self? If the answer is yes, their walls begin to lower. If the answer is no, even slightly, their instinct is to pull back. Safety, for them, is not created through emotional pressure or urgency. It is created through steadiness. A partner who remains grounded, who does not react impulsively to distance, who does not turn every moment of silence into a crisis. This is the kind of presence that allows an avoidant person to relax. Because in that space, they are not being forced to perform, prove, or constantly reassure. They are simply allowed to exist. When a partner becomes suffocating, it is rarely because they intend harm. Often, it comes from a desire to feel secure, asking for more time, more validation, more closeness. But to the avoidant individual, this can feel like being slowly enclosed. Even small expectations can begin to stack up in their mind until the relationship feels like a weight rather than a refuge. And once that feeling sets in, their instinct is not to negotiate, it is to withdraw. On the other hand, a partner who embodies emotional self-sufficiency creates an entirely different experience. This kind of person does not rely on constant reassurance to feel valued. They have their own rhythm, their own sense of identity, their own emotional stability. And because of that, they do not unconsciously demand that the avoidant partner fill emotional gaps. Instead, they invite connection without making it a requirement for their well-being. This dynamic is powerful because it removes the avoidant person's greatest fear, the fear of being responsible for someone else's emotional state. When that pressure is absent, something unexpected happens. They begin to move closer not because they are asked to, but because they feel safe enough to choose it. Safety also shows up in how conflict is handled. A suffocating dynamic escalates quickly, emotions rise, demands are made, and the avoidant person feels cornered. But a safe partner approaches conflict with calmness and clarity. They express themselves without overwhelming, listen without attacking, and give space when needed without turning it into punishment. This teaches the avoidant individual that closeness does not automatically lead to chaos. Over time, this consistent sense of safety rewires their expectations. They begin to associate connection not with pressure, but with peace, not with losing control, but with being understood. And as this association strengthens, their natural defenses soften. What is often misunderstood is that avoidant individuals are not incapable of deep love. They are simply selective about the environment in which that love can grow. They need a space where they can breathe, where their independence is respected, and where closeness is offered rather than imposed. In that kind of environment, their capacity to bond is not limited, it is unlocked. There is a common belief that love grows stronger through constant closeness, but for an avoidant individual, attraction often deepens in the presence of emotional independence. This may seem counterintuitive at first. Many assume that the more available, attentive, and focused you are on someone, the more they will value the connection. But for someone who is sensitive to pressure, too much emotional dependence can feel like a silent demand, a weight they did not agree to carry. Emotional independence, however, sends a very different message. It communicates, without words, I am whole on my own, and I choose to be with you not because I need you to complete me, but because I value you. This distinction matters deeply. It removes the invisible burden of expectation and replaces it with freedom. And for an avoidant person, freedom is the doorway to connection. When a partner is emotionally independent, they do not monitor every shift in behavior, searching for reassurance. They do not interpret moments of distance as rejection, nor do they react with urgency when communication slows down. Instead, they remain centered. They trust their own worth, maintain their own life, and allow the relationship to breathe. This kind of presence feels calm rather than consuming, and that calmness is what draws the avoidant person closer. It's important to understand that avoidant individuals are highly perceptive when it comes to emotional energy. Even if nothing is said directly, they can sense when someone is becoming overly reliant on them for validation or stability. And when they feel that reliance, it triggers an internal resistance. Not because they don't care, but because they fear becoming responsible for something they cannot consistently provide. In contrast, when they are with someone who is grounded within themselves, the dynamic shifts. There is no silent pressure to perform, no expectation to constantly reassure, no fear that stepping back will cause emotional collapse in the other person. This absence of pressure creates a surprising effect. It allows genuine desire to emerge. Desire, in its pure form, cannot exist where there is obligation. It thrives in choice. When an avoidant person feels that they are free to come and go without causing harm, they begin to choose connection more willingly. Their interactions become less guarded, more authentic. They start to invest not because they have to, but because they want to. Emotional independence also preserves a sense of mystery and individuality within the relationship. Instead of merging identities, both people remain distinct, bringing their own experiences, thoughts, and energy into the connection. This creates a dynamic that feels alive rather than heavy. For the avoidant person, this is essential. It reassures them that closeness does not mean I am losing their identity. There is a quiet strength in being able to love without clinging. It requires self-awareness, discipline, and trust in oneself. But when this quality is present, it transforms the entire experience of connection for someone who fears being overwhelmed. Instead of feeling like they are being pulled into something they might not control, they feel invited into something they can explore at their own pace. And in that space of freedom, attraction doesn't fade, it deepens. There is a quiet paradox in human connection. The more you try to force closeness, the more it resists you. The more you allow space, the more it has room to grow. This becomes especially true when dealing with someone who is sensitive to emotional pressure. Respecting space is often misunderstood as indifference or distance, but in reality, it can be one of the most profound expressions of understanding and emotional intelligence. For an avoidant individual, space is not a luxury, it is a necessity. It is how they process emotions, restore balance, and reconnect with themselves. When they step back, they are not always stepping away from you, they are often stepping back into themselves. If this need is interrupted or challenged, it creates tension within them. They begin to feel watched, expected, or even controlled, and that feeling pushes them further away. Many people respond to distance with urgency. They reach out more, ask more questions, seek reassurance, or try to close the gap quickly. From their perspective, they are protecting the relationship. But from the avoidant person's perspective, this can feel like an invasion of the very space they need to feel safe. What was meant as love begins to feel like pressure, and pressure activates withdrawal. Respecting space, on the other hand, sends a completely different signal. It communicates trust. It says without words, I do not need to chase you to feel secure. I trust the connection enough to let it breathe. This key. Second of response is disarming. It removes the sense of urgency and allows the avoidant person to return on their own terms, without feeling cornered. There is also a deeper principle at work here. Intimacy cannot be sustained in a state of constant closeness. Just as breathing requires both inhaling and exhaling, connection requires both togetherness and separation. Space creates contrast. and that contrast keeps the relationship from becoming emotionally overwhelming. For someone who is easily overstimulated by intense closeness, this balance is essential. When space is respected, something subtle begins to shift. The avoidant individual no longer associates closeness with the loss of freedom. They begin to see that they can move closer without being held too tightly. This changes their internal response. Instead of anticipating pressure, they begin to experience relief. And relief opens the door to trust. Trust, once established, changes the entire dynamic. The avoidant person becomes less defensive, less reactive. They start to initiate contact more naturally, not because they feel obligated, but because they feel safe enough to do so. What once required effort begins to flow more easily. It's important to understand that respecting space does not mean suppressing your own needs or pretending not to care. It means responding with awareness rather than fear. It means recognizing that closeness cannot be demanded, it must be invited. And sometimes, the most powerful way to invite someone closer is to step back just enough for them to move forward. There is strength in restraint and wisdom in patience. When you resist the urge to control the pace of connection, you allow something more authentic to emerge. Instead of a relationship built on reaction and pursuit, you create one grounded in mutual choice. And in that environment, intimacy is no longer something that is chased, it becomes something that naturally unfolds. True connection with someone who fears emotional overwhelm is not built through intensity or persistence alone, it is built through a quiet combination of patience, self-awareness, and inner stability. These are not surface-level qualities, they require depth of character. Without them, the relationship easily falls into cycles of misunderstanding, where one person pushes for closeness and the other retreats to regain control. Patience, in this context, is not passive waiting. It is the ability to hold steady without forcing outcomes. It means allowing the relationship to unfold at a pace that does not trigger resistance. An avoidant person does not open up on command, and trying to accelerate that process often has the opposite effect. Patience creates a sense of ease. It removes urgency from the connection and replaces it with time for trust to form, for defenses to lower, and for emotional safety to develop naturally. Self-awareness is equally essential. Without it, reactions become automatic. When distance appears, it is easy to interpret it personally, to assume rejection, to feel unworthy, or to respond with frustration. But self-awareness interrupts that pattern. It allows you to recognize your own emotional triggers and separate them from the other person's behavior. Instead of reacting impulsively, you begin to respond thoughtfully. You ask yourself, am I seeking reassurance because something is truly wrong, or because I feel uncertain? This level of reflection prevents unnecessary pressure from entering the relationship. Inner stability is what holds everything together. It is the foundation that allows you to remain grounded, regardless of external shifts. When you are internally stable, you do not rely on constant validation to feel secure. You do not measure your worth based on someone else's level of availability. This steadiness is deeply calming to an avoidant individual. It signals that the relationship is not fragile, that it will not collapse under moments of distance or silence. Without AR stability, the dynamic often becomes reactive. One person's withdrawal creates anxiety in the other, and that anxiety leads to behaviors that increase pressure, seeking constant communication, demanding clarity, or trying to define the relationship prematurely. These actions, while understandable, reinforce the avoidant person's fear of being overwhelmed. But when stability is present, the response is different. There is space for understanding rather than assumption, for calm rather than urgency. Another important aspect of this dynamic is emotional responsibility. Each person must take ownership of their own feelings rather than placing that responsibility on the other. An avoidant individual is especially sensitive to feeling responsible for someone else's emotional state. When they sense that they are expected to fix or stabilize their partner, it creates resistance. But when both individuals manage their own emotional world, the relationship becomes a place of sharing rather than a place of sharing and burden. Over time, these qualities create a secure environment where trust can take root. The avoidant person begins to recognize that this connection does not demand more than they can give. They start to feel that they can approach closeness without risking their independence. And in that realization, something shifts within them. They become more open, more consistent, more willing to invest. What emerges is not a rushed or forced bond, but a steady and enduring one. It is built on understanding rather than expectation, on presence rather than pressure. And while it may take longer to develop, it carries a depth that is not easily shaken because it was formed with care, awareness, and respect for both individuals' emotional realities. So in the end, understand this clearly. The bond you seek is not created by chasing, controlling, or demanding. It is created by becoming steady, self-aware, and deeply grounded within yourself. When you stop trying to force closeness and instead embrace calm strength, patience, and respect, you transform the entire dynamic. You no longer stand in front of someone asking them to stay. You become the kind of presence they feel safe enough to return to. And that is the quiet power of true connection. It is not loud, it is not rushed, it is not imposed, it is chosen, nurtured, and sustained through trust and freedom. When you live by this principle, you don't just change your relationships, you elevate the way you love and the way you are loved in return. Thank you for your time, your attention, and your openness to understanding something deeper within human connection. Take this wisdom with you, reflect on it, and apply it with intention. Goodbye, and may your connections be guided by clarity, strength, and peace.